Welcome to Westchester Jewish Community Services. As a leading agency in providing a comprehensive spectrum of human services, we have been helping people since 1943. We serve all people in Westchester County, regardless of age, income, or ethnicity. We provide a wide variety of essential and dynamic services that make a difference in people's lives. Children, teens, adults, and senior citizens are served by our network of programs located throughout the county. When people come to us for assistance, they become part of the WJCS family. Our highly trained and skilled staff focus on you and your family and are committed to becoming your partner in finding solutions. For more than half a century, we have been connecting people to services that help them overcome mental, physical, or emotional challenges. WJCS is here in your community when you need us.
Welcome to the Ways We Care of WJCS. I'm Angela Nally, Coordinator of Community Relations. WJCS is Westchester's leading mental health, social service, developmental disabilities, and healthcare agency serving people who live and work in Westchester County. I'd like to remind people that we have a very special opportunity this year to raise funds. We have received a donation of a wonderful motorcycle from Moto Guzzi. We will be raffling this motorcycle at our Gala fundraiser, Swing into Spring, in March. If you're interested in purchasing a $50 raffle ticket for this motorcycle, please call 761-0600, extension 204. We've all been aware of the recent reports in the media regarding workplace violence. There's the gunman in Seattle who opened fire in an office, killing 2 workers. There's the copy repairman in Honolulu who killed 7 people in a Xerox office building. And the Atlanta day trader who killed his family and in 2 brokerage houses killed 9 people and also injured 12. These are the kinds of incidents that come to mind when we think about workplace violence, the disgruntled employee on the job. Yet statistically, these incidents are rare. There are many forms of workplace violence, but for many people, domestic violence is brought with them to the workplace. They simply can't leave it at home. Tonight, we'll take a closer look at how abuse suffered at home or domestic violence spillover carries over into the workplace. I'm fortunate to have 2 well-informed guests with me on tonight's show to discuss this important issue. I'd like to introduce Greg Chartier, who's Director of Human Resources at J.F. Jelenko & Company in Armonk, New York. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Angela.
And Silvana Trabout, who is a coordinator of WJCS's Partner Abuse Intervention Program. Welcome, Silvana.
Thank you, Angela.
Let's start with learning more about the issue of domestic violence spillover with Silvana Trabout. Her Partner Abuse Intervention Program provides comprehensive domestic violence services to adults and children who are victims of domestic abuse. We'll give that program's number at the end of the show. Silvana, would you tell our viewers what WJCS's Partner Abuse Intervention Program consists of?
It consists of individual counseling, group counseling, and counseling for children who are child witnesses of domestic violence in the family. It consists of training programs for professionals and programs when required for businesses to help them develop a partner abuse program or an intervention program. We'll work with an EAP in a business to help their employees as well.
What's an EAP?
Employee Assistance Program. Sorry.
It's okay.
And that would be where if an individual working in a company needs counseling in a particular area or identifies this as an issue, they can go to a service outside the company so that they're not getting counseling on site.
Okay. Now, how would domestic violence affect an employee on the job?
Oh, many, many ways. If someone is being abused at home, they may lack sleep, they may be stressed, they may be depressed, they may have anxiety. All of those issues they're going to take personally with them to the workplace and try to function on the job while worrying about what's going on at home. Oftentimes they're required to account to their partner at home what's going on in the workplace. I called you at 12 o'clock, you weren't at your desk, where were you? Your office mate or your secretary said you went out to lunch. Who did you go with? Who are you dating? All kinds of prompting, numerous telephone calls to check up on them, sometimes faxes, sometimes emails, questions to other employees about where you are, how long you're there, when you're in a meeting, who are you meeting with. All kinds of controlling and manipulative behavior on the part of the abuser.
Well, how would a person behave at that point, this person on the job who's being harassed? How would they exhibit that stress?
Well, oftentimes they're trying to hide it from their employees because they've either been told by their abuser, don't you dare tell anybody, or this is between us. You know, don't you ever say anything about what goes on at home, at work. So they could be withdrawn. They could be stressed and trying to get the work done, but distracted and not able to get it done. They could have multiple sick days or latenesses or leave early. If they have injuries, they're probably trying to hide them so that they're not questioned. Many times they're shy and very dutiful on the job in the hope that they won't be questioned so that they could keep their employment.
So keeping the secret is a really important
Very big.
part of this behavior.
Yeah.
Greg, can you tell us from an employer's standpoint, what kind of warning signs might an employer look for from an employee who is possibly being abused or harassed by a partner?
In my experience, I think the biggest thing we see are performance changes. So the employee who performed at a certain level now performs at a lower level or performs at a different level than they did before. And usually those are the first signs that something's going on in that person's life that doesn't allow them to perform the way they used to. So there's other obvious things. The person who was outgoing and now becomes shy and introverted. The person who wears clothing that's different than they used to wear because they're hiding something. So there's some other things that go with that, but performance is really the biggest issue.
Some of the more obvious things also may be bruises or something.
They're
like
there, but most people try to hide the bruises. You know?
I've only seen that once time, and I don't think in most of these cases, I don't know.
Yeah, I
would
agree.
say most of the time there are other things that would manifest, not the physical part of it. But
Mostly the stress level or
Changes, like Greg said, changes in behavior, changes in way of doing things.
those are usually the best signs. Yeah.
Silvana, how serious is this problem at the workplace from your perspective?
It's very serious. It's very serious because, I mean, from the perspective of employers, it affects the bottom line. There's a loss of revenue. There's a reduced productivity. From the perspective of the individual, they may lose their job. You know, they may certainly impact the way others. You know, they can't hold up their weight because of the stressors at home. They may build resentments from their fellow employees, and they don't feel they're able to talk about it. You know, there's a constant fear of losing the job. And
Greg, could you add something
Yeah,
to that in terms of the impact on the
for the
workplace?
person being abused and then coming to work, the impact for the employer becomes a reduced productivity for that employee. So if they were performing at a certain level, now they're performing at a lower level, you don't get the amount of work done that was done before. And I think even as large as that, the effect on other employees is tremendous. Because there's always some kind of network among people. Everybody has people that they have lunch with or talk to or hang out with at the water cooler. Those people are affected by that abuse as well, and their performance is affected. So there's a tremendous roll-down effect, not just from the one employee, but from a lot of people involved. In small companies like Jelenko, where people have worked together for a long time, there's even more impact because now people are talking about that incident or those incidents or those issues or those problems, and that takes time and effort away from the job as well. So there's lots of different pieces. Forget the attendance. You know, you start to add in attendance and lateness and all those other things can have a tremendous effect on a company.
Pulling other employees away from their work or the distraction
Absolutely.
of it all.
That
So it's
becomes the conversation.
a domino effect in a
Absolutely.
sense. Yeah. Silvana, how might an employee begin to discuss a partner abuse or domestic violence problem with their employer or at the workplace with someone?
well, in an ideal situation, they should be able to go to their human resources professional or whatever designated person that is within the company, but they're not going to do that unless they feel safe. And safe means, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be moved to another place? You know, how am I going to be supported? More often than not, they're telling the one person that they might feel close to, or they're not telling anyone. and they really are trying to sort of hold it together and being more and more stressed in the process because of the issue of, you know, if I lose my job, I'm going to face consequences at home.
Well, during my research on this topic, I learned that in 1990, American businesses paid an estimated $3 to $5 billion a year in medical expenses associated with domestic violence, and lost an additional $100 million in lost wages, sick leave, as Greg mentioned, absenteeism, and non-productivity, and that relationship problems account for 36% of workplace violence incidents. I also learned that 78% of human resources professionals consider partner violence a workplace issue. These numbers may surprise some of our viewers, as they did me. Greg, as Director of Human Resources for J.F. Jelenko, which is a dental health products manufacturer.
Small manufacturer, yeah.
Perhaps you can provide a business perspective on domestic violence and its effect on the workplace. I understand that domestic violence spillover is one of the issues covered in an organization's workplace violence policy.
Yes.
Would you mind telling us about your company's workplace violence policy?
We have actually several policies. It's a sequence of policies that deal with what we call behavioral kinds of things. And all of those policies together, we use the term zero tolerance to describe them. So we say to our employees, we have zero tolerance for any kind of violence at all, domestic violence included. Now, for an employer, I can't go to your home and ensure that you're not abusing your spouse, but I can protect my employees who are being abused as a result of their workplace issues, and that's how we address those kinds of domestic violence things. But we say basically that here is what we define as unacceptable behavior. Then we train everybody in terms of how we will deal with those issues if we do confront them, and then finally we enforce those things. And so there's a progression, a continuum of things that we do. Our policy is about, or our series of policies are about 3 years old. We have, knock on wood, we haven't had too many incidents, but it does happen. And we've been pretty consistent about doing that. On top of that, we have placed a series of environmental, administrative, and behavioral things that are not policy so much, but are driven by how do we prevent these things from occurring. And again, we're addressing violence as an issue, not just domestic violence, but we say, for instance, that lighting in the parking lot is a perfect way to eliminate things that go on in the parking lot. How people get into the building, get out of the building. Angela, you've been in our building. It's hard to get in, it's hard to get out. So access becomes an issue. We also take a lot of time in terms of our screening procedures for new employees. So we're looking for things in that person's background that might indicate a propensity to violence. And then our work practices, our policies that I described, all those things that we do are all part and parcel with this continuum of things that we do to try to prevent it, but if it does occur, we have a policy to deal with it.
To deal with it. Can you tell us why Jelenko felt it necessary to establish such a workplace violence policy?
Well, I think there were two reasons for us. One, you described a number of issues that are in the paper, and I think our employees became nervous about that, what is our employer doing to protect us from those kinds of things. And I think the second issue is we deal with customers. We have about 5,000 customers around the world, and some violence is verbal. You know, we're talking about domestic violence, but some violence is verbal, and some of it's over the telephone. And so does my employer support me when a customer becomes violent on the telephone or in person? Absolutely, positively, and that's part of our focus, is how do we not only protect our employees from other employees, but how do we protect our employees from people who are not employees? All right, so that's part and parcel again with the whole thing.
Now, how does your company communicate its workplace violence policy to both the management as well as the support staff?
We've gone through a series of training exercises, beginning with our managers. Our managers, we meet on a monthly basis anyway. And in those monthly sessions, we'll go through training types of issues. Here's what you should be aware of. So we spend time in several of those monthly issues talking about violence as an issue, describing the policy and how the policy would be enforced. Then we met with our employees, and our employees meet within departmental groups, which could be from 3 to 20 people, And those departmental groups will meet with those departmental groups and say, here's the policy, here's why we did it in response to some of your complaints and comments, and here's what the policy says, let's make sure everybody understands that, and here's how we're going to enforce it. So everybody at least gets that. Then it's in our handbook, so every employee gets a copy of our handbook, which they sign a receipt for, indicating that they've read it and understand it. And then new employees receive a handbook, and they sign the same receipt, indicating that they've gotten that policy as well. So, you know, part of it, we say to them, here's the policy, here's what you have to do, here's your behavior that's acceptable and not acceptable. Part of it is we say to our employees, you're responsible, you're an adult, we're going to treat you like an adult, and you must behave in these ways. So you get the message across.
Okay. Now, if an employee did happen to come to you to disclose a domestic violence situation, what would you do, what would the company do to assist he or she in that situation?
I have to say, I would think the chances of somebody doing that are slim and none. And more so not because they are worried about their job, because it's an embarrassing thing. I don't want to tell my employer, who will my employer tell? I think for me, again, in my experience, most people who are abused tend to be women who are abused by their male spouses. They're not going to come to me. They might come to my assistant who's a woman, but they're probably not going to come to me. So if it happened,
right, if it did
the
happen.
policy has actually a description of how the investigation would be conducted. It's similar to a sexual harassment investigation. Confidentiality becomes very important. We would investigate the incident as far as we could take it and then try to make a determination. In a domestic violence situation, there's not much you can do other than counsel the employee to seek some help outside of work. I can't help if that employee's spouse is abusing her. But we could send them to a program like a WJCS or something like that. We would pay for that so that they could go to that program and feel like they would get some help outside of work. But I as an employer can't focus on those kinds of things. I can only focus on the performance issue. However, performance is a very powerful tool. And so you're right, employees are worried about losing their job. I can say to that employee, if you don't do this, we're going to start down this path of performance discipline now. And yes, it sounds like I'm punishing you twice, but I want you to go to that program. I want you to get the help that you need. And if I have to use your job to make you do it, then that's fine. Then we'll do that. And the EAP is a good example, where any employee has a personal problem, whether it's a drug abuse, alcohol abuse, family problems, whatever. You want to force them into those situations where they get help. You don't want to lose them if you can help it. You know, a good employee who all of a sudden changes performance has not become a bad employee all of a sudden. Become a good employee with problems. So you want to help those people with those problems.
Some of the things that you might consider, I would imagine, would be things like an employee changing their hours, possibly to change their routine.
Sure.
I'm going to ask Silvana that in a moment in terms of a safety plan and things like that, or possibly changing their location at the job, or even something as simple as changing email or a telephone number. Those are maybe some of the other
I think we would be
things. What
we would look for, I think, in those situations is the employee say to us, I need help with these things. Fine, we'll help you with those things. And I don't know whether changing the telephone number protects you from an abusive spouse, but maybe having somebody screen those calls and saying, I'm sorry, but she's busy, you can't talk to her anymore. Or maybe saying to the employee, I'm sorry, you get too many personal phone calls, tell your spouse that if they call anymore, they can't talk to you. So maybe there are other things we can do that are environmental, because we control the environment in a lot of ways, would help to shield that employee from those kinds of problems.
Silvana, we mentioned briefly just a moment ago about safety plans, and that's an important part of someone seeking help and doing something to get themselves out of this situation. Could you explain to our viewers a bit of what a typical safety plan might entail?
Yeah. Actually, it's not typical. It's very specific. It depends upon what's going on with that individual person. If she has already, for example, filed for an order of protection, which says to her abuser, you're not allowed to do this, this, and this, or make multiple calls to the office, or call me to the office at all. I mean, a lot of that could be specific if she's begun the process of getting legal help. If she's not begun that process, the safety plan is actually the planning for that process. What am I going to do to be able to tell my employer so that that could be a support mechanism? Or how can I tell my sister so that she could be knowledgeable about what's going on for me and be a support mechanism, so that I can gather the information and the material that I need in order to safely get out of the situation where violence is being perpetrated against me. That's her goal. I mean, in reality, the only way the violence is going to stop is if the person who's doing it stops doing it.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's not a great incentive for that.
What should, Greg, coworkers do on the job if they suspect that someone is a victim of partner abuse or some kind of verbal abuse, domestic violence?
Part of our policy, and I would separate again domestic violence and violence in general, but part of our policy talks about reporting incidents of violence, and where there's a mechanism for them to go to your manager. If you're not comfortable with your manager, to one of the vice presidents. If you're not comfortable with the vice president, to human resources. If you're not comfortable with them, we have a hotline you can call. So there's a sequence of places for that person to call, depending how comfortable they feel and how anonymous they want to be, to report that they see a problem.
Now, could you give us a sense of the corporate culture in Westchester? What is going on in other businesses in the county regarding workplace violence issues and policies?
I think, at least in the county, it's a very serious concern. I think most employers are very worried about it. Workplace violence is something that happens to everybody. Every employer I've ever been in, there's some kind of violence, certainly multiple instances of violent acts. And the closer you are to the public, the more involved you are in things like retail, the more that's true. So I think there's a very real concern on the part of employers that violence is a problem. How do we deal with that? I think on top of that, employees are telling their employers, you better be concerned about this because we're concerned about it. And that's a little more press related, where I read about the news about the post office or an incident in Seattle or whatever, but the employees come to work and say, oh my God, what are we doing at work to do those things? So I think there's a lot of attention being paid to it.
A lot of trip mechanisms going on there,
Absolutely.
I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned when we talked that you actually had an instance where you had an employee who was suffering from some kind of abuse. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
It's a little different, I think, because both employees worked at the place at the same time. One was a full-time employee, the other was a temp, but they were still in the building at the same time. And it was a situation where a couple living together, he was abusing her after hours. So we were able to, and it became obvious in a lot of ways, not just from performance, but she was telling people at work, and we shared some bruises, and there were lots of obvious things for us. But we were able to go to him and say, look, what goes on in your personal life is your business. However, your girlfriend's performance has suffered, and we think it's deteriorated because of these things, and if that continues, you'll be disciplined because you're affecting her performance, and that's not allowed. That's the unacceptable behavior as far as that's like if you were working together and I did things that deliberately make your job more difficult or ruin your projects as we went along, well, we would discipline me because I was doing it to you. It's the same situation where we were able to control that through his job and not through her job. So that, I think that's an atypical example. I don't know if you've seen that like that.
It's
but
a good example, though.
But it did stop. And in fact, I think luckily for her, the relationship broke up not that long afterwards, so maybe that's good.
I'm glad there was a positive outcome there.
I thought, at the time I thought it was.
Well, you used all the power that you had to hold the abuser accountable, and that's really
the power we have is job power.
Yeah.
That's the power, yeah.
It's a great example.
Silvana, can you tell us how WJCS can help both an employer and someone who's suffering from domestic violence?
Well, we're helping those who are suffering every day. I mean, that's what we do. We do therapy, we do counseling, we do family treatment, we work with the children who are witnesses. So, of course, we can offer those services in all of our clinics. And we can help the employer by helping them even look at their workplace violence policy. We can be the EAP referral for that employer. We can give them some colleagues that we've come across who've actually done this kind of work so that they can make the intolerance of this in their workplace visible to their employees. I mean, in the policy is one way to do it, but posters is another way to do it. You know, information sheets with paychecks, some sort of disclosure during Domestic Violence Month in October and maybe sometime in July for no reason at all, where they say, you know, if you're having this problem, we want to help you. Anonymously, generally, globally, getting the message out that we, ex-employer, are willing to be partners with you if you're in this situation in your home without judgment. Maybe we'll make it a little bit more easy for that person to come forward. And if they're a large corporation, there's a lot more options that they have. You can transfer, I think you mentioned it earlier, from an office in one town or a store in one town to the same store in another city. And thereby really incorporate a safety plan without having your name disclosed to anyone who calls on the phone.
You mentioned earlier, I believe, or when we talked, that you also provide training. How would that work for an employer?
Well, we do trainings all the time, and it's open to anyone. We have a number of trainings coming up this year that if you call the office, we can give you information about it. If an employer had a specific need, we could come in and tailor a training to that employer and develop what they might need for their managers or for their line staff, or maybe a presentation just to the employees themselves to let them know, but perhaps, you know, in partnership with the employer first having a policy.
So I get the sense that raising awareness
Is a big part of it.
Is a big part of it,
Oh, yeah.
I would agree
at the
with that.
workplace, and for everyone, from support staff, from every employee up.
Yeah, because the
through
secrecy
management.
is the big issue here.
Right.
It's secret from family members, it's secret in the home, and the maintaining of the secrecy is a big part of it. So the more we can do to break that secret, the better we can help
I
people.
think people feel like one of the things we've seen as an indicator of violence are people who feel that they have no more options. And that's so a lot of what we try to do in our training is to identify when somebody is in that situation, to try to give them more options, and that's exactly what you're talking
Exactly.
about. You want to give them more options so they don't feel, oh my God, I don't have anything to lose now, so I might as well
Right.
do whatever.
Exactly.
I would like to thank you both for
My
appearing
pleasure.
on tonight's program.
you.
Thank you so much. If you would like more information about WJCS's Partner Abuse Intervention Program, please call Silvana Trabout at 949-7699, extension 371. All calls are confidential. WJCS will be holding a fundraising gala, Swing into Spring, on March 18th. If you're interested in purchasing tickets to the event for the dinner, please call Dale Wang at 761-0600, extension 205. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Ways We Care of WJCS. I'm Angela Nally, Coordinator of Community Relations. WJCS is funded by UJA Federation, United Way, corporations, foundations, government grants, and private individuals. I'd like to tell our viewers about a very special opportunity we have this year to raise funds to benefit the Learning Center. We will be raffling a fabulous Moto Guzzi Grand Touring motorcycle at our Swing into Spring Gala in March. If you are interested in purchasing a $50 raffle ticket for this fantastic bike, please call 761-0600, extension 204. We've all heard the terms date rape and relationship abuse. Somehow, though, we don't equate these terms very readily with teenagers. But the fact is that abuse amongst teens does happen, perhaps more than we'd like to think. Researchers estimate that more than half of American teens may be involved in dating violence as abusers or victims. And even more serious, more than 50% of all rapes are of adolescents, the majority of which are perpetrated by acquaintances or dates. These statistics may be a wake-up call to many people, and we will be talking about this important issue of teen violence in tonight's program. We are thrilled to have two teenagers with us this evening who are part of a team of teenagers who are involved in planning, organizing, and running a teen conference that will take place in March called Beat Violence. They are Matt Siegel.
Hello.
And Shauna Einzig. Welcome to you both. And I'd also like to introduce Silvana Trabout, who is the coordinator of WJCS's Partner Abuse Intervention Program. Welcome, Silvana.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you all for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Silvana, would you please give our viewers an idea of what kinds of behaviors define dating violence or relationship abuse of any kind?
Controlling behaviors, manipulative behaviors, a behavior where one person is trying to get the other person to do something against their will or forcing them to do something against their will. I mean, it could be forcing a person to kiss them. It could be touching her. Usually it's a him touching her in a way that she doesn't want to be touched. And of course it could be physical violence, smacking, pushing, shoving, pinching, hitting, all the physical abuses that you can think of. And the ones you mentioned earlier, date rape.
Mm-hmm. How about things like intimidation, or that falls under control?
It falls under controlling and manipulative behaviors, to threaten in any way, to call somebody or beep them. I mean, the kids carry beepers an awful lot. Numerous times, if you don't call me back within a certain amount of minutes, there are going to be consequences later. Consequences could be the threat to break up if you're in a close relationship, and that's an awful lot to be dealing with if you're with someone that you care about.
Could you explain to us what, if any, differences there are about abuse in a teenage relationship versus an adult relationship? And I'm sure there's both similarities and differences, but maybe
there are more
highlight
similarities than differences. The differences would be that you're dealing with young people who are impressionable. Depending upon what they've witnessed in their own home, they may not know what's appropriate or inappropriate. There's obviously the peer pressure of what's going on in the school, for example, or in the community of friends. If two people are known as an item, and one threatens to break up with the other, it's who broke up with who becomes a lot of value. Being with or without a boyfriend is a pretty big thing. And of course, you know, there's the pressure to be intimate, perhaps when you're not ready.
Okay. Now, in your view, how serious is dating violence?
I think dating violence is very serious. I mean, I hear it from the teens that I meet, and I certainly hear it, you know, in the schools, people who are working in the schools. There's an awareness that there is a replication in the teen community of what's going on in the larger society. And in many ways, it's very similar. Forced sex, rape. But more than that, the pressure to take poor behavior, to be cursed at, to be ridiculed, to be told what clothes to wear or what clothes not to wear, to be told to cut your hair or to let it grow. And with the threat of, if you don't, I won't go out with you anymore, or, you know, I won't be your boyfriend, girlfriend, that kind of thing.
So criticism is a big
Criticism
part of
is
the
big.
intimidation and control that would occur in that kind of relationship. Well, what could you say, how would you characterize warning signs in a dating relationship that would suggest that someone's either capable of abuse, maybe it's borderline, or maybe they actually are an abuser? I think sometimes people, you know, will explain away and say, oh, well, you know, he didn't mean it, he was in a bad mood or something like that. So what kind of things should someone look for and say, oh, that's a real warning sign?
You know, it's interesting, because if you talk to people who've been in this situation, who've seen it, they know it. You know it when you see it. There's a difference between a one-time incident that's playful or teasing, or a one-time incident because somebody had a bad day. The thing about abuse that's really necessary to know is that there's a pattern. It doesn't happen just once. It happens over and over again, and the purpose is to ensure that the abuser is in control of the relationship.
Many times we think, though, especially with younger folks, that jealousy is a great thing and that it means, oh, he really cares about me, and that sort of thing. Would that be considered someone who's overly jealous? Would that be considered a warning sign? Well,
if it's a pattern, and if it's frequent, and if it's about every little thing, and if it doesn't stop, and if there's no explaining it away. You know, if it's a jealous, I mean, everyone has jealousy. You can't just say jealousy in general. Everyone, if you're involved with somebody, or if you like somebody and you see them with somebody else, you're going to get jealous. What you do, one-shot deal. And if you can talk it over, if you can discuss it, if you can work it out so that there's not a repetition of that kind of behavior, then it's just an incident. It's just part of growing. But if somebody is jealous who has abusive tendencies, they're going to do things like, I don't want to see you with that person. If I see you with that person again, I'm going to, you don't really care about me. And then there's all kinds of manipulations that follow that, so that you don't talk to that person even if he may be a good friend. You don't study with that person even if you're in the same class. You cross the street to avoid seeing that person because your boyfriend is right here, and if he sees you, there are going to be consequences that you don't want to deal with.
So then separation from friends or even family
Absolutely.
would be considered a real warning sign that something is wrong here. That if
Frequent harassment, frequent phone calls that are unexplainable, just to check up on you.
where have you been, and so on.
Yeah.
Even as far as you mentioned earlier, beepers and cell
Yeah.
phones, if you get a cell
Sure.
phone for a gift, maybe that's something that is not quite such a loving thing.
It depends on what precedes that gift and what follows. If it's because, if it's because I want to keep track of you and where were you? I called you on the cell phone. Why didn't you have it turned on? Who were you with?
Now, we had talked earlier, and you made me aware of something that's called the cycle of violence, and the three parts of that. And I think that was very interesting, and I think our viewers should know what that is, if you could explain that.
Well, initially there's a tension period. It could be finals are coming up. It could be the school year is ending. It could be, something that happened within the family. A parent is sick, a sibling got hurt. Anything that's a tension builder, followed by an incident. An incident of abuse depends upon what level of violence the relationship is in. An incident could be anything from being extremely criticized over and over again for a period of days to being date raped. And then following that incident, there's what's known typically as the honeymoon period, and that's the apology, it'll never happen again, flowers, promises, all kinds of things to ensure that the relationship is still intact. And then the buildup of tension until there's another incident. And the time frame between those things could be days, months, weeks. It's hard to tell.
It's a true cycle.
It is a cycle, and it could be a long time in the beginning, and then the time frame shortens for the person who is perpetrating.
Okay. Now, what do parents need to know about relationship abuse, and what kinds of things should they be aware of?
Well, they need to be aware of the fact that it exists and that kids are talking about it, and they're not talking to their parents for the most part.
Right.
They're talking to each other. Sometimes they're talking to trusted adults. And if there's a parent who is a trusted adult, then they're hearing about it as well, that it's a concern. Nobody wants to be abused. And for the most part, nobody wants to be abusive unless there's something to gain. Sometimes it's a learned behavior. I mean, one of the things that we know is young people repeat what they see at home. So if a parent is in an abusive relationship and you think that you're only doing it when the kids are upstairs or in their room and their music is loud and they're not hearing you, they're hearing you. Right. They're hearing you when they're 3 and when they're 5 and when they're 7. And by the time they're teenagers, they're repeating it.
So if a parent does suspect, though, that their child is a victim of some kind of abuse, whether it's actually physically or the control that we mentioned or the intimidation and the jealousy and the phone calls and that sort of behavior, what do you suggest a parent should do?
It's going to vary widely. A lot depends on the relationship between the parent and the child. I mean, hopefully there is enough so that a parent can say, you never deserve to be treated badly. You never deserve to be disrespected that way. If someone treats you that way, no matter what they're saying on the other side of it, they don't really love you. Now, having said that, if you're talking to an adolescent, that could, they might just do just the opposite of what the parent says. But I think if a parent knows that there's help out there that's available and that they'd be willing to allow their children to get help either through the school counselors or through an agency like WJCS, that would be a good thing. If you want to go, here's a place to call.
Now, would a scenario be that possibly a parent could either call a guidance counselor or another trusted adult or teacher or even a friend of their child's and talk with them about it to try and intervene, or does that not really work?
Well, that could be a tough one because you don't want to undermine. You really want to be direct with your teenagers. They're young adults, and they're at an age where you don't want to manipulate them and sort of reinforce the kind of manipulation, even if it is for a good thing. I think that there's too much of a potential for resentment there.
Okay. Now, what should a teen do if a sexual assault does occur?
If it's a sexual assault, it's a blatant lawbreaker. I mean, I hope they'll call the police. I hope they'll report it. We know that sexual assaults are largely underreported, but if I have to give a message, the message is to please report it. Go to your local police station, file the report, and go to the hospital if it's a rape, and see one of the trained nurses for a rape test.
They should get counseling.
Absolutely.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, counseling comes after the crisis of the immediate incident, although when they go to a hospital, there is usually a rape crisis person that's available if it's that kind of a setting. And then the long-term after effects take time.
Yeah. Well, this may seem like a silly question, but is it always a female issue?
Not always. Not always. I mean, it seems to run parallel to the larger society. Somewhere between 90 and 95% of the time where there's a rape, it's among peers. It's young men against young women. But boys are sexually abused and sexually assaulted by adults. And that's a different issue for them. It's not the same as a peer relationship. There's help for that, and they need to know that they're not alone, and that it does happen. And it's a great secret, not very talked about. But again, WJCS has the Child Sex Abuse Treatment Center for those issues, and very skilled professionals to help when there is a boy who's been sexually assaulted.
Okay. This is also a difficult question, I think, because there's many ways this can be accomplished, but it's very difficult. But how can a teen end an abusive relationship?
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
They're in the same school. You know, you want to stay with your friends. The best way to do it is to break the silence and to try to get adult support, to try to get peer support, tell your friends. Friends are pretty good at holding their friends accountable and protecting them and being in groups. And adults are good at ensuring that when they have to be in certain situations that they're not at risk, that the teachers know that this person's supposed to stay away from them, so that you don't get someone coming over and trying to be nice and saying, oh, I'm just, asking her about a homework assignment, when in fact they're just trying to get close so that they can be threatening in some way.
Right. Now, we talked about it in the earlier segment, but I think it would apply here as well. Teens need to develop a safety plan of some kind, and the elements of which you've just mentioned somewhat. But what could that conceivably be for a teen in a school environment? And
well,
so
in a
on?
school environment, for example, I would say you don't want to be alone. You don't want to be in the school alone when your perpetrator could show up. You don't want to walk to your car by yourself. If you can let authorities know and have a car, I mean, much like in the workplace, if you can have a parking space that's closer to where the guard is, or some sort of a security person, so that you can be escorted if you're perhaps in a late class or something like that. That's one example. And you want people to know if you can get an order of protection, if there is an assault, or if there is a violation that's a perpetration. And in that case, the person needs to stay away from you even if you're in the same school. And that's where some of the school officials can be helpful. Transfer to another class if necessary, transfer to another school if necessary. But it's much harder the more you add movement away from your peers.
I see. Now, Silvana, you are working with Shauna and Matt on a teen conference called Beat Violence. Now, WJCS is co-sponsoring this event with the YM and YWHA of Mid-Westchester, and also working in conjunction with the Westchester Jewish Teen Center on the conference. I understand that the teens are running the conference themselves with some assistance from you. Would you please explain to the viewers what the conference is about and what your role has been in working with the teens?
It's called Beat Violence. It's a name they came up with. There's a logo, and a lot of information that we're putting together that the teens have had input on. And there's a large group of them. Shauna and Matt are two, but there's a number of them that have been meeting almost weekly, every other week, to talk about this. And we came up with some topics. There's going to be workshops. There's going to be a keynote speaker. We'll have the requisite, bagels to start out with and pizza in the middle. And it's going to be on a Sunday, March 12th. We'll have 4 or 5 different workshops on aspects of violence in the community. None of the topics aren't finalized yet, so I don't want to go into the specifics here, but know that they'll be relevant to what we're talking about here today. And we have adults who are going to be facilitating the workshops who are knowledgeable in the field. Legal aspects, dating situations like what we're talking about. And people who know about these issues, myself included, will be facilitating the workshops with the teens participating.
It sounds like a great day, really.
We hope so.
We're happy that you both came to join us today. Thanks so much. Really, it's more than commendable that you two are involved with the teen conference, as well as have such a great interest in teen violence and relationship abuse and its impact on society. Matt, do you know why the Teen Center picked this particular topic to focus on for the conference, teen violence?
Well, the reason we decided to focus on the topic of teen violence through our affiliation with WJCS is that, it's definitely something we can all see is a very prevalent issue for us as high school students, and as any other students or teenagers. It's something that goes on a lot. It's something we have to deal with. It's something we see, and if you see a problem like that, that's a large problem around you, the tendency is to want to do something about it. And I think this conference is a great way for people to talk about those issues and maybe come up with ways to possibly, I want to say fix them, but make them easier to deal with.
Begin to approach a solution to the problem anyway, right?
Right, definitely.
Right. And Shauna, why are you interested in this topic of dating abuse?
Well, I first became interested through my neighbor, who's a domestic violence lawyer, and she informed me about the status and all the different information about dating violence. And I know the information, and I feel obligated to tell other teens about the information now. And through this conference, it will be a great way to bring everyone together and to tell people about it.
I think you're right about that. And Matt, what was your call to action to become involved? Why get involved with this conference?
Well, first, again, it's a very prevalent issue for me that I see goes on around me. And also, a lot of the topics Alana was talking about, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, things like that, really spills over into school a lot, which is where we are most of the day. And I think when you see things like fights and things among boyfriend and girlfriends, among friends, where people are resorting to violence instead of other matters, really impacts me, and I want to do something about it because that's something I have to deal with every day, and everybody around me has to deal with.
It's tough to watch that happening around you and not respond. Yeah. Shauna, how important do you think it is to draw attention to relationship abuse, teen violence of any kind?
Well, just as Matt said, it's very important because it happens all the time. And I know a lot of my friends don't really know that dating violence and dating abuse is a set thing and that things can be done about it. So therefore, they should know that things definitely could be done about it. And it's a great way to tell them that it can be.
Silvana, what else can be done to make the public more aware of problems like these with young adults in terms of violence?
Well, we're doing it right here.
Yes,
we're
we
telling
are.
the public about it. The one thing that teens always say is that there's never enough opportunities for them to really be heard. And I know that by going and meeting with them and hearing what they're really interested in, we're able to come to common ground and find topics that we know about that are important to us as adults and that are just as important to teens. And we can use, logos that that they like or that they've designed. One of the girls in the group designed the logo that we're using for Beat Violence. Matt was involved in helping us do one of the advertisement cards that we mailed out to all the different youth groups in the county that we could get names of. It's open to all high school teens, and we want them to come, and we want their parents to encourage them to come. And even if a parent is uncomfortable talking about this, here's an opportunity where teens can come and talk to other teens about it with adult supervision so that misinformation doesn't get put forth.
That's really a grassroots effort then, and I think that's a great place to start from the ground up, literally. Matt, what recommendations might you make based on what you believe is really needed in the community to help teens cope better with these kinds of issues?
Well, I think the first thing that we can do immediately would be education. Like I have a health class, And these are issues we talk about in health class. And I think something like that has really been brushed aside as a less important issue, a less important class than, you know, something like math or something like English or something like that. And I think education in schools where we really are all day to talk about these issues, like the conference we're doing, is the first step. And I think the next step, which is much more difficult, are the real causes of why this violence occurs today. And I think if you're going to talk about that, you really have to look at things like pop culture. I really think there's a big loss of respect these days. And I don't know. I don't want to say that my generation has been different from other generations because I obviously wasn't around then. But I think that there are certain things that are unique to now, which cause people, teenagers especially, to resort to violence. I think we need to look at those causes and really work on long-term methods of correcting them.
When you say a loss of respect, would you mind explaining what you mean? A loss of respect amongst
I think a loss of
teens, or?
Among some people, there's a loss of respect for, I think there's a loss of respect for adults. I don't want to say elders, adults. Among each other. I mean, even among friends. I mean, even among my friends, a lot of times people will resort to fighting, or because, you know, that's the only way they really feel they can deal with their, or want to deal with their problems. Makes people feel tough, things like that. And I think if people had more respect for each other, you know, there's much smarter, much better ways to go about solving problems than having to resort to these kinds of violence.
You're absolutely right. And Shauna, how about yourself? What comes to mind when I ask you what you might recommend as something coming out of the conference and going forward in terms of making things better?
I think that the most important thing is that friends should help friends, and that, I mean, of course schools could do as much as they can, but you don't go home and talk to your teachers on the phone. You talk to your friends on the phone. And if they're aware of what's actually happening, then they could go and help you to get help. Because most teenagers would deny that they're in an abusive relationship and aren't going to really, you know, go out one-on-one and go get help. But if they have their friends to help them, it'll be much easier for them to go out and go talk to a teacher or talk to a guidance counselor or even their parents.
Make that second step. First, kind of get a friend and get that support going, and then you can step out.
It will be much easier then.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what do you hope to accomplish out of the conference and even going forward?
Well, I hope that everybody who comes has a good time, first of all, and I hope that they really come out of the conference feeling that they've learned something that they could say, oh, well, you know, I didn't really know that was going on among people that are my age. They may go to a different school, but basically they live the same kind of lives I do, and that really connects it to their life. So, you know, maybe they can even say, well, now I know where to tell people where to go, or I know where I can go if there's people who are suffering this kind of abuse and violence.
And how about you, Shauna? What do you hope?
Well, pamphlets will be given out, so people will have information about where to go. And again, hopefully people will be coming with their friends, so even coming to the conference, they'll have support. And people, you know, might be quietly saying to themselves, oh, I'm in an abusive relationship, and hopefully through the conference they'll realize that they can go out and get help for it.
That recognition, that would
yeah, they'll actually
that person
realize that they're in an abusive relationship.
Right. That's the first step to solving any problem, recognizing that it exists, right? Shauna, how can teens register if they would like to attend the conference?
Well, one could call me at 914-654-8278 or email me at Jemmy68, and I'll be able to send them a registration form.
Excellent. Okay. Now, Silvana, could you tell our viewers a little bit more about, not a little bit more, something about your program, the Partner Abuse Intervention Program? I'd like to give you a minute or so to do that. We haven't really focused on that in this half.
Well, it is the Partner Abuse Intervention Program that's working with the teens for this conference. We do direct service, we do counseling, we do therapy when needed. We work with the rest of the WJCS staff to provide individual counseling and group counseling for women who are abused. If after the conference, if we find that there's enough of a need to do a teen group, we'll do a teen group. If that's something that makes sense. We certainly do individual work with teens now and with younger children who are witnesses to violence in the home. But one of our missions is to go out and to educate and to do training. And doing the teen conference is something that that we know will be a huge success. And we're just hoping that if people participate, they'll have an opportunity to really share with some dynamic people who've put a lot of effort into it.
I want to thank everyone for viewing. If you'd like more information about WJCS's Partner Abuse Intervention Program, please call 949-7699, extension 371. Thank you.